Express on Smooth 98.1 in association with Stanbic IBTC.
Studios Live. It's 15 minutes with Rotus. Good morning, guys.
Good morning, Valentine. Much for yesterday.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Lagos, that truck that blocked me. There's a company on the stock exchange. I won't mention the company.
I was talking money yesterday and I felt rich for once.
Nice.
We're joined by Muyiwa Stanbic IBTC. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for 0981. That's 080981.
Thank you, Valentine. All right, so yeah, 3 days now in the green zone. All-share index still bouncing back after the 11 ugly days of losses. 1.5% appreciation yesterday. 38,435 is where we closed. Market cap is at 13.9 trillion naira, almost 14 trillion again. Year to date, we're up by 0.5%. 41 gainers, 16 losers. Fidelity Bank was the top gainer yesterday. Guinea Insurance PLC was the top loser. We are at 363 naira to Muyiwa, welcome again to the show. We have, I believe, an update from Stanbic on the your PMI for May.
Yes.
So what are you seeing?
Yeah, so it's still showing positives. And currently we're actually at an all-time high.
Oh, okay.
So it's high at 59.1. And you know how the PMI works, where 50 means an improvement, below 50 means a contraction, and it's so even though if you compare it to the central bank's own PMI,
right?
Central bank showed a decline in May versus April,
right?
As still showing a steady improvement, but overall, it's still reflecting an improving environment. Okay. Even though, if we compare our PMI performance in Q1 versus the GDP numbers, so GDP numbers showed an improvement, but it's still showing that the economy isn't growing as fast, and I'd argue that also showing that we're not where we were in 2014. Okay. So still showing that there's still much more room for improvement. And if I highlight a few positives from the PMI showing strong output, driven by new orders and faster orders, also showing improved buying activity from the private sector as well. Okay. And then in terms of negatives, so we're showing increase in, and then I think for some reason as well, the PMI is showing that domestic exports is declining. Some of the anecdotal evidence showed that there's some delays because of congestion in the ports, and then loss of business, some foreign business, just because of that delay as well. But overall, there's clearly some improvement. There's still steady improvement in the economy.
On that regard.
Yeah.
Okay. Encouraging stuff. You just mentioned the domestic exports. Looking at foreign trade, though, the figures coming from we're going to move now, of course, to the from the Bureau of Statistics. Looking at foreign trade for 2017, we're showing an improvement. Exports increased for Q4 2017, up from Q3 as well, and also full year 2017. I suppose that's some good news. Yeah, we can as far as
good news, good for our balance of payments, and balance of trade position. So clearly good news. But like we were discussing earlier, that it's still most of that exports is still driven by oil. And so if you compare production levels to this time last year, it's still clearly much stronger. And then in terms of value as well, given the improvement in oil prices this year versus last year, previous quarters as well, that's driving that improvement in overall exports. And I'll tell you what's positive as well is that import is declining. And it seems it's still more reflection as well of, so you can argue that even though FX supply has improved, but to some extent it's clear that behavior and appetite has changed as well. So given the devaluation and also inflationary pressure on those imported goods, affordability has reduced, and because of constrained purchasing power of the average consumer as well, demand for such imported goods appear to have reduced.
I was going to ask. I know that the African, us signing the free trade agreements with the rest of Africa. I know it's been delayed, and recently Vice President Shibanjo came out and saying that well, it hasn't been signed because they didn't consult the private sector, and that's still ongoing.
Sure.
You think these figures, if that was ever to happen, would you say?
That's why, are you talking about exports now?
Yeah, the exports. Yeah, right. Yeah. Not really. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think so. Maybe at the margins, and I think because the core really is our manufacturing is still weak. So if you look at our core manufacturing products, cement seems to be a big one. I think on the consumer and some consumer companies talking about exporting to neighboring African countries. But if you look at Africa and consumption overall and drivers of that, most of those goods are all still imported out of the continent. Improve our capacity to export. But if you look and think about previous conversation as well, exports still driven by oil, and so
that wouldn't change much. So then I guess there is an argument for the private sector. I guess the Manufacturing Association of Nigeria and others who are saying, no, if you open up the borders, it'll flood goods coming in from the rest of Africa. So imports, that one would increase then, I guess.
Yes, much more likely to increase. And I think also it will be more a function of the kind of tariffs or quality of ports in those other countries as well. More because I would also suspect that most of these countries will still import goods from other African countries anyway. So it makes goods easier to move from land borders, and still ultimately foreign goods, in my view, still coming into your country. And what I mean by foreign is goods outside Africa. Not necessarily Africa, because manufacturing in Africa is still
on the slow side. Okay. We move on from the trade issues, trade figures, or decent stuff there. Moody's, the ratings agency, the headline here, they said Nigeria's perennial budget delay reflects weakness of institutions. This is their senior analytical advisor for Africa, Mr. Aurelien Mali. He said he had an interview with one of our newspapers, I think it was with This Day. Muyiwa, the budget still hasn't been passed. He's saying that this is as a result of weak institutions in the country. Is there any accuracy to what he's saying? Or I guess it is a valid concern that we still haven't passed this budget up until now, or rather, excuse me, it hasn't been signed by the president, rather. Yeah.
Yes, it is. It clearly is, and I think the point he was making as well, it's the impact on infrastructure spend as a whole. But I think there's also one reality. So even though he references the economic growth plan and how critical that is, but I think there's still one point that the federal budget only accounts for about 7% of our GDP. And so if you think about it I think what the budget does help is show the private sector what the federal government's focus is, and help them to allocate resources more from that angle. So his point is very valid, and we would argue that this still is one of the longest delays we've had in a while. And I suspect it's also because of the election cycle as well. We're moving closer to,
and of course this now affects 2019's budget, of course, and the Rolling Stone just keeps going on and on. All right, well, let's move to FX now. The BDCs, they've gotten their way. I think Nonso and Ayo discussed this yesterday with Valentine. They're talking about the CBN finally moving the margin for trade. But this headline here is coming the Alhaji Aminu Gwadabe, who is the president of the Association of British. He's saying that he said as a result of the CBN doing this, that Valentine, the guy said that the Naira is now firm, and now the CBN has moved the margin for them.
So I suspect if you look at the parallel market, the Naira seems to have appreciated on the parallel market.
Right.
Suspect for them as well, their margins have improved, and so obviously you think that they would smile because of that as well. But I think the increased supply from the CBN does help Naira, because if you think about last week, there's clearly pressure on the currency, and I think central bank's response seemed to have addressed that to some extent. And I think the iron window as well, I think position right now seems to be that there seems to be steady supply, and central banks or need for central bank intervention seems to have reduced materially more, because from the foreign portfolio side as well, given where yields are, and I think generally there seems to be some stability in the whole emerging market space. So we're seeing flows come.
But the CBN is still the major player, Sha. I mean, to some extent. And then
currently, yes, from the central bank, unlike a few weeks ago where the central bank had to intervene and supply effects to them.
See how that goes. This person did not leave a name. Should we help? Should we just read?
Her number ends with 7272, and she asks, "Hello, Rotus. How best can one invest 1 million naira for 6 months starting now?"
You know, the first question is risk appetite. You know, are you a risk taker? You want to hop?
It's short, right? You'd argue that 6 months is, if you're looking at the stock market, then maybe you're trying to speculate. Right? So if you're 6 months, and depending on what that money is for, if it's for rent or school fees, then you should be buying trading.
You don't want to play with that money.
Okay, so treasury bills will returns.
And currently still slightly above inflation, so maybe there's some marginal real returns. But your money is safe.
It's safe. Also, the federal government savings bond, the window is, I think it closes tomorrow. Minimum of 5,000 naira, maximum of 50 million if you want to invest in that. There's a 2-year and a 3-year. I believe Stanbic, you can reach out to you guys for a form to invest in that. So we would advise fixed income depending on your risk appetite and of course the time frame.
We'll end with the Bring Up Kamu's message. It says the CBN is still the only player in the market, just like the federal government is the biggest spender in the economy.
We hardly disagree. We run out of time, but thank you so much for joining us today. It's a
Thank
pleasure
you for having me.
Thanks for coming in.
Stanbic holding it down. Valentine.
Send a tweet to Rotus at Valentine Quote on Twitter. Lagos. Coming up next is Frankly Speaking with Muyiwa Falavi. It's smooth breakfast.
Headlines.
We had a substantial amount of